Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today, I'm bringing you a brand new story, one that many of you have been curious about for a long time. It is the story of Tusan, the younger sister of Officer Hung. If you've been following the videos about Hoài Ca and Hung, you've probably noticed a quiet girl who often appears somewhere behind her brother. A familiar face, yet a story that has never truly been told. A gentle smile that hides far more than anyone realizes. And today, I'm finally going to tell you the heartbreaking truth behind her life. Tusan, the girl we usually see only in passing, actually carries many wounds in her heart. On the outside, she seems calm, obedient, and soft-spoken, but her life is filled with shadows that most people don't know about. We only see her stand beside Hung for a few fleeting moments, yet behind those moments lies a past she never wants to revisit. In this video, I will begin from the very root of it all. Why does a kind, gentle girl like Tusan always have such sad eyes? Why is it that every time she appears, even without saying a single word, people can still feel the quiet pain she carries? This will be the beginning of Tusan's story. A sorrowful story, but one that needs to be told. Tusan was born in a small village tucked deep between wild mountains and forests. A place where the mornings echoed with roosters crowing from across the valley. And the nights were lit only by fireflies flickering gently in front of the wooden porch. From the time she was just a tiny girl, she had already been forced to grow up in hardship. A life where the word rest simply didn't exist. Before dawn even touched the sky, with fog as thick as a blanket covering every path, Tusan had to carry 2 large metal buckets and walk a full kilometer down to the stream to fetch water. Every step sank into wet, cold soil that numbed her feet. By the time she returned home, her small shoulders were aching. Yet the day's work had only just begun. By noon, when the sun was scorching overhead, she strapped on a rattan backpack nearly bigger than herself and headed into the forest to gather firewood. And at night, while children her age were already curled up in their mother's arms, Tusan was still out in the fields, stooped over, transplanting rice, pulling weeds, or gathering vegetables to sell at the market the next morning. Her tiny hands had become rough and sunburnt, hardened like the soil on the terraced fields. Her family was so poor that some meals consisted only of boiled sweet potatoes, a handful of wild greens, or a bowl of watery rice porridge so thin you could see the bottom. On days without rice, they simply went to bed hungry, drinking stream water to quiet the gnawing in their stomachs. Yet no matter how difficult life was, the family clung tightly to one another, believing that if they persevered, their suffering would ease someday. And then, when Tusan was married off, her family received a generous bride price, the largest sum they had ever held in their lives. Because of that, everything at home improved. Her mother no longer had to wake up before dawn to earn wages. Their meals finally had a bit of meat, and their shabby, leaking house was repaired with new beams and a proper roof. But that very change became a double-edged sword. Tusan's mother carried the rigid, outdated mindset of the older generation. She lived by one belief, a belief she held as if it were an absolute truth. A daughter who's married off is like a bowl of water thrown away. Once she leaves, she must not return, must not complain, must not bring shame to her family. To her, marrying her daughter into a wealthier family was her greatest achievement, a decision she was proud of. And because of that, she refused to allow her daughter to show even the smallest hint of unhappiness or weakness. Any complaint from Tusan was labeled ungrateful, disrespectful, or a disgrace to her parents. From that day on, Tusan lost the only place she could once run to when life overwhelmed her. The home that used to shelter her from pain. had turned into a closed door, cold, distant, unforgiving. And even if she stood right at that door, just a few steps away from reaching her mother's hand, to Tusan, that distance felt like a bottomless chasm she could never cross. On Tusan's wedding day, everyone in the village thought it was the luckiest day of her life. Anyone passing by stopped to offer congratulations, and those who saw her whispered in admiration, "She's blessed, marrying into a wealthy family. She won't have to suffer anymore." Every compliment, every admiring glance was directed at her. But no one knew that behind the white wedding veil, behind her forced smile, Tusan's heart was a storm of fear and anxiety powerful enough to choke her. As she stepped into the wedding car, she didn't see a bright future. All she saw was a long, endless road, one she wasn't sure she could survive. Her husband, the man everyone believed was her lucky fate, was cold as stone. He didn't look at her, didn't hold her hand, didn't say a single word. His expression was so blank it was as if this marriage had nothing to do with him. From that very moment, Tusan sensed something terribly wrong. But she had no way to speak it out loud. Her husband's family was indeed wealthy, but wealthy to the point they forgot how to treat people with basic kindness. Her mother-in-law was cruel. Every word from her mouth cut into Tusan like a blade. She didn't need to shout. The way she looked at Tusan alone was enough to make the girl shrink like she had done something unforgivable. And then there was the sister-in-law. Rude, arrogant, always looking at Tusan with disdain. To her, Tusan wasn't a sister-in-law. She was a maid newly brought into the house. Laundry, cooking, scrubbing floors, running errands. Every task, big or small, was dumped on her shoulders, without even a hint of guilt from anyone. And that was the beginning of Tusan's life without light. A life where waking up each morning felt like a weight pressing onto her chest. And every night ended with silent tears soaking her pillow. And through it all, she never dared to tell anyone. Because no matter how much she hurt, she knew one thing for certain. Her mother's house would never open its doors to welcome her back. Tusan worked from dawn till night, without a single moment to truly breathe. From the day she stepped into her husband's home, she never had a single day of rest. She woke up before the sky even changed color, walking across the cold courtyard where the chills still clung to the ground. Every task fell on her shoulders, sweeping the yard, starting the fire, preparing meals for the entire family. And in return, she received no gratitude, only criticism and scolding. Just one small mistake, the rice slightly mushy, the soup a bit too salty, and her mother-in-law's voice would cut through the house like winter wind. That woman's stare felt sharp enough to slice through her chest, leaving Tusan with no choice but to lower her head and endure. Then came the day she gave birth to a baby girl. A tiny, fragile little being who became the only spark of joy in her suffocating life. As she held her newborn, tears fell, tears of happiness. Because at least in that dark world, she had someone to love, someone to hold on to. But that joy didn't last long. The moment the family learned the baby was a girl, her mother-in-law's contempt showed instantly. A sigh, a shake of the head, a cold, disappointed glare thrown at Tusan, as if she had committed some terrible crime. To them, the fact that she couldn't give birth to a son meant she was worthless. From that day on, the weight on her shoulders grew even heavier. No one cared that she had just given birth. No one noticed she was still in pain. If she moved even slightly slower than usual, she was scolded again. Every morning, while the sky was still too dark to see anyone's face, Tusan had to carry her baby to a relative's house. Before heading alone to the fields, cold wind slapped against her skin, dew soaked through her feet. Yet she still bent down to transplant each rice seedling, doing hard labor without a single complaint. At noon, her meal was just a few bites of cold rice, eaten quickly under a tree's shade, or standing alone in the middle of the field. No one asked if she was hungry. No one asked if she was tired. And she wasn't allowed to complain. By late afternoon, when dusk barely touched the horizon, she rushed home to start another round of chores. Cooking, washing, scrubbing, cleaning. Then she would hold her baby and lull her to sleep, with the gentle voice of a mother, even though her own eyes were swollen red, from holding back tears dozens of times each day. In that big house, no one saw her as anything at all, not as a daughter-in-law, not even as a human being. Sometimes, Tusan felt like a faint shadow drifting silently through someone else's home, with no voice, no choices, unseen, unwanted, unloved. There were moments, in the middle of days so exhausting she could no longer tell morning from night, when Tusan wished for just one thing: to go home and see her mother for a little while. Not for long, just long enough to sit on the front porch, listen to the wind slip across the metal roof, and let her heart breathe for a moment. But even that tiny wish became something out of reach. Her husband always looked down on her family. Whenever he mentioned her mother's house, his voice was dripping with contempt. To him, Tusan's hometown was nothing but a poor, backward place he wanted no connection to. Tusan knew that very well. Every time she wanted to ask permission to visit home, she saw the look in his eyes, and swallowed her words back down, letting the lump in her chest grow heavier each time. And then, when she finally gathered every bit of courage she had to return to her childhood home, the person she believed would protect her, her own mother, was the one who pushed her deeper into the darkness. Before Tusan could say anything, her mother's voice came sharp and cutting, each word like a blade. They paid the bride price to marry you. Whatever happens, endure it. A woman must put up with things. Just 3 sentences. But it was enough for all of Tusan's hope to shatter right before her eyes. She stood there, gripping the hem of her shirt tightly, wanting to cry but unable to. Her husband's family saw her as nothing. But the words of her mother, the only person she once believed would understand her, felt colder than all the cruelty she faced in her in-laws' home. In that moment, it was as if Tusan fell into a deeper darkness than anything she had ever endured. Not because she was scolded, not because she was unwelcome, but because she realized, in this world, she no longer had any place to belong. One day, Tusan's mother-in-law discovered that some money in her cabinet was missing. The moment she noticed the shortage, she spun around instantly. No thinking, no checking, no considering anyone else. Her fingers stabbed straight toward Tusan's face, like a knife aimed directly at her heart. You took it, didn't you? No evidence. No questions. No attempt at fairness, not even the bare minimum given to a human being. Just a raw, brutal accusation. Her sister-in-law stood beside them, pretending to be shocked, one hand covering her mouth. Yet her eyes glittered with excitement. She added fuel to the fire with vague, insinuating words, pretending to feel sorry when all she wanted was to crush Tusan's dignity into the ground. She's been going to Mother's room a lot lately, who knows? Money doesn't just disappear. Only a few people live in this house. And her husband, the one who should have protected her, the one who should have stepped in to defend what was right, stood silent like a lifeless stone. No questions. No defense. Not even a glance in her direction. He stood there coldly, as if watching his own wife being falsely accused was normal. Something everyone knew would happen sooner or later. Tusan trembled. Her whole body felt like it could collapse at any moment. She forced out each word, her voice so choked it barely came out. I didn't take it. I didn't." But her words fell like stones thrown into a bottomless abyss. No echo, no acknowledgement, no belief. In the very house where she had swept every tile, cooked every meal, washed every piece of clothing, they now looked at her as if she were some sneaky thief. They surrounded her with eyes full of disdain. Their insults slammed into her, like slaps delivered without hands. Tusan stood there with her fists clenched, her heart breaking piece by piece. She had never asked for anything, never protested, never lived for herself. Yet in the end, even the last shred of dignity she had was crushed under their feet without mercy. In the very home where she served every meal, every garment, every chore, they pinned on her a crime that someone like her would never even dare to imagine. That night, when the entire household had fallen asleep, when the soft snoring from the living room blended with the chirping insects outside, when darkness swallowed every corner of the large yet freezing house, like an empty, abandoned well, in that heavy, suffocating silence, Tusan sat curled up alone in the old kitchen. This was the place she spent all day rushing in and out of, hands never catching a break. Yet now it was the only corner where she still felt she existed. The fire in the stove had faded, leaving only a few dying embers glowing faintly, like the final breaths of a life about to extinguish. The weak light cast a trembling shadow of her small frame onto the floor, shaking just like the heart inside her trembling chest. She held her baby girl in her frail arms, arms that had carried so much hardship, yet were still gentle enough to cradle her tiny angel. The baby slept soundly, cheek pressed to her mother's chest, her tiny eyelashes fluttering with each peaceful breath. As she looked at her daughter, Tusan felt her heart soften, as if the faint scent of milk alone was enough to soothe part of the pain she endured that day. But right at that moment, tears began to fall silently. No sobs, no cries, just tears that had been held back for far too long, finally finding a way out. They slid down her warm cheeks, dripped along her chin, fell onto her baby's soft lips, then onto her worn, faded clothing, before sinking into the cold ground as if they never existed. No one saw them. No one heard them. No one knew how deeply she hurt tonight. Holding her baby tighter as her arms trembled, Tusan suddenly wanted to run. She wanted to take her child and flee from the house filled with accusations, filled with contemptuous eyes that cut her to pieces every single day. Just once she wished she could return to her mother's house and hear someone ask if she was okay. But then, like a hammer striking her heart, her mother's voice echoed in her head. A daughter who leaves her husband brings shame to the entire family. One short sentence, but powerful enough to slam shut every door she had barely dared to imagine opening. Her fragile hopes, like thin wisps of smoke, were choked and extinguished instantly. Though her body ached to the point she could barely stand, though her hands were cracked from endless labor, though her heart had been crushed again and again until nearly beyond repair, the one person she trusted to shelter her was the same person who forced her into a dead end. In the darkening kitchen, the embers faded little by little. The last glimmer of light flickered weakly, ready to disappear. On the wall, her shadow appeared small, curled up, a lonely silhouette so heartbreaking it hurt to look at. Yet deep in her tear-filled eyes, a faint spark remained, weak but not extinguished, fragile but unyielding. That spark whispered to her, she must live, not to please her husband, not to endure the cruelty of her in-laws, not out of fear of society's expectations, but for the tiny child resting in her arms, the baby girl whose slightest glance at her mother, was enough to ignite whatever strength remained inside Tusan. This child was the only one in the world who loved her genuinely, who needed her, who was bound to her by a tie nothing could sever, even if the whole world turned its back on her. As long as she had her daughter, she would not let go. And for her child, no matter how suffocating the pain became, Tusan would force herself to keep living. Tusan's journey is only just beginning. Behind those silent tears, behind a small, fragile-looking woman, lies a heart fighting with everything it has, against a cruel and unforgiving fate. Will she continue to endure a loveless marriage? Will she find even the smallest escape to save herself and her little daughter? Or will the weight of family expectations and prejudice bury every last bit of hope she has? The answers will unfold in the next videos. If Tusan's story touched your heart, leave a comment below, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next chapter of her journey. See you all in the next episode. The story is long and painfully suffocating, but Tusan deserves to be heard.
Xin chào tất cả mọi người đã quay trở lại với kênh của mình. Hôm nay thì mình tiếp tục đưa đến với mọi người video tiếp theo về câu chuyện của Ly Hoai Ca. Mình xin lỗi, mình nói lộn về câu chuyện tình yêu của lytudiep và xe ô dêm chứ. Bữa nay ở khí hậu ở trong mình thì nó hơi lạnh rồi, nhưng mà mình là một người chịu lạnh khá là tốt nên là thường mình vẫn thấy nóng trong người. Bây giờ là 10 giờ rồi và mình vẫn chưa có ăn tối. Bây giờ chắc mình sẽ đi ăn. Mình sẽ ăn thành ăn khuya luôn. Vì như ăn khuya nhiều nên là cái bụng nó bị mập ấy. Tạm biệt mọi người, hẹn gặp lại mọi người trong những video sau.